I'm Wendy Dixon. I'm 32 years old when she finally understood what her family had always been trying to tell her without words. And it happened 3 weeks earlier at her parents' lavish 40th wedding anniversary dinner, held in their pristine white colonial house in suburban Boston. The kind of house with trimmed hedges and polished floors that quietly announces success to anyone who steps inside. 30 guests filled the room that night, church friends, neighbors, former colleagues, laughing and clinking glasses while Wendy moved through the space the way she always did, quietly helping, refilling drinks, adjusting place settings, blending into the background, until her father stood up, tapped his champagne glass, and announced with pride that to celebrate 4 decades of marriage, they were taking the whole family to Hawaii the following week, a luxury trip to Maui that made the room erupt in applause and excitement as Wendy smiled, already picturing ocean air and sunlight, imagining what it would feel like to be included for once, until she asked the simple question that would change everything. "What time is our flight?" The room fell silent. Her father looked at her like she'd misunderstood something obvious, and in front of all 30 guests, he said calmly, "You don't need to know, Wendy. You're not part of the trip. Someone has to stay behind and take care of the kids," while her mother nodded as if this were practical, reasonable, and already decided. And in that moment, surrounded by witnesses, Wendy realized she hadn't just been excluded from a vacation, she'd been excluded from her own family. This wasn't new, of course, only clarified. Wendy had always been the invisible one, the helper, the dependable extra set of hands, the daughter whose decade-old Honda Civic was parked on the street so her sister Megan's Lexus could take the driveway, the one introduced to guests simply as Wendy, she helps out, while Megan was introduced by her husband's job title, the one who arrived early on holidays to cook and stayed late to clean, who wrapped presents because her mother's arthritis acted up but never interfered with bridge night, who ran birthday parties, babysat without being asked, skipped her own deadlines because family comes first, and wore the glittery world's best aunt apron she'd been given like a uniform rather than a gift. Wendy worked part-time as an accountant with flexible hours and modest income, nothing impressive by Dixon standards, but what her family didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that 3 years earlier, after a breakup that left her feeling like furniture in her own life, Wendy had wandered into a pawn shop and bought a used Canon DSLR camera for $180, and with it began quietly photographing people society overlooked, elderly women at bus stops, overnight janitors, street vendors with worn hands, people who were always there but never seen, just like her. And she posted these images anonymously online under a project she called Invisible Women, gaining 12,000 followers without ever telling a single family member, hiding the camera in her closet wrapped in an old cashmere scarf like a secret she wasn't sure she deserved. The only person who truly saw her was Aunt Ruth, her mother's younger sister and the family's so-called disappointment, a woman who never married, moved to Carmel by the Sea decades earlier, opened a small cafe with a pottery studio, and was spoken about with pity and disapproval at every family gathering. Yet it was Ruth who recognized Wendy's talent immediately, who encouraged her to keep shooting, and who, 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner, admitted she'd shared Wendy's work with a gallery owner in Monterey, the same man who had just emailed Wendy about a potential solo exhibition, an email Wendy almost deleted because good things weren't supposed to happen to people like her. The night of the anniversary party unfolded exactly as expected. Wendy arrived early, worked all day, wore a plain black dress so as not to draw attention, babysat while Megan and her husband mingled, and missed dinner entirely until the Hawaii announcement confirmed what Wendy had always suspected. And later that night, alone in her parents' kitchen, she discovered an email thread between her mother and sister that removed all doubt. "Keep Wendy here to watch the kids. She doesn't have anything important to do anyway. It's like having free help." Followed by Megan's reply, "She'll probably feel useful for once. It's kind of sad, but it works for us." Words Wendy screenshotted, emailed to herself, and carried like proof of a truth she could no longer ignore. That night, she called Aunt Ruth, who offered her a room above the cafe, and said the words Wendy had never heard from her own parents: "You deserve this." And by morning, Wendy was packing 3 suitcases, her camera, her laptop, and leaving behind the apron, the expectations, the role she never volunteered for. 2 days before the Hawaii trip, Wendy told her family she was leaving for California for work, and the reaction was furious. Accusations of selfishness, threats of being unwelcome, guilt-laden voicemails, and Megan's final text meant to wound, "You'll end up alone, just like Aunt Ruth," a message Wendy reread before realizing it wasn't a threat at all. The drive across the country took 5 days, each mile loosening something tight inside her, until she arrived at Ruth's Cafe, where for the first time someone said, "Welcome home." And within 24 hours, Wendy was standing inside Coastal Light Gallery, signing a contract for her first solo exhibition. 15 photographs, full production covered, 60% commission, her name printed clearly on legal paper as an artist, something she'd never been allowed to be before. The exhibition opened 6 weeks later to a full gallery, live music, champagne, red dots appearing beside her work, and when one photograph sold for $3,000, Wendy felt something shift permanently, proof that her vision mattered. But the night truly came full circle when Megan and Derek walked in unannounced, sunburned and uncomfortable, asking not to celebrate Wendy but to reclaim her, telling her Megan was pregnant again and they needed her to come home, to which Wendy calmly and publicly said no, explaining she had value, that her work was real, and that she would no longer abandon herself to be free help, a declaration witnessed by collectors, journalists, and strangers who applauded not her art but her boundary. When her parents arrived moments later demanding explanations, Wendy read their own words aloud in her gallery, exposing how they had reduced her to usefulness, and for the first time, Patricia Dixon had nothing to say as the social image she had curated dissolved under honest scrutiny. Wendy sold 8 pieces that night, earned more than she'd made in months, secured a private commission, and walked home knowing she had crossed a line she would never uncross. Months later, her life settled into a rhythm of morning cafe shifts, afternoons in her studio, new exhibitions, magazine features, and messages from women who saw themselves in her story, and her family faded into a distant, manageable place of occasional texts and restrained contact, healthier than before. Wendy never returned to Boston, not as the helper, not as the invisible one, but as someone who finally chose herself, understanding that boundaries are not betrayal, that usefulness is not love, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight for a place at a table that never wanted you there. It's to walk away, build something of your own, and let your life speak for itself.